Well, the Prime Minister this morning reacted to the impending departure of his ambassador to the United States.
The ambassador has done a fantastic job for Canada for 6 years. 4 as ambassador, a little more than 4 as ambassador, and then 2 before that, across a huge range of issues. Obviously, we always have a huge range of issues with the United States, and particularly in the most recent time, during an intense period of discussions, as everyone knows, with the U.S.
So there's no official word yet on who will be replacing Ambassador Hillman once she leaves her post in January. But for more on what type of person the Prime Minister might be looking for, we've got Canada's former ambassador to the United States, Frank McKenna, who joins me now. Frank McKenna, it's good to see you, sir. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you. Good to be here.
What kind of a situation does this leave Canada in with the ambassador and lead negotiator leaving right in the run-up to these trade negotiations potentially?
Well, I think it's a good situation. Make no mistake, Ambassador Hillman has done a terrific job, and she certainly deserves to leave on her own terms. And we do have ample time before this agreement gets to its final stages, so it's probably a good time. And remember, although she's an extraordinarily important part of the team that are working very hard on this file, from Dominic LeBlanc, Melanie Joly, the Prime Minister himself, we have a number of people who are working on this file, and there'd be many staff as well at the embassy. When I was negotiating softwood lumber, I was really carried by the trade negotiators at the embassy who knew the minutiae of the deal and helped us to get it through.
Yeah, Kirsten Hillman, she'd been there a while and tremendously capable, but kind of doesn't fit the profile of your typical ambassador to the U.S. because she came from the diplomatic corps through the civil service side when it tends to be more of a political job. So what do you think the Prime Minister is going to weigh now in choosing her replacement? The name Mark Wiseman is out there as someone as being strongly considered, former head of the Alberta Pension, IMCO, and involved in the private sector. What are your thoughts on what Mark Carney should do here?
Well, certainly the ambassador did a terrific job with the extraordinarily challenging situation in the United States. So my view is there are 4 or 5 attributes that are important for that posting, and not all postings. I'm a big fan of having the professional and career diplomatic corps in most postings. But in Washington, you need to be really politically savvy, and it helps to have a political background. It's almost like a secret handshake. I got an awful lot more work done when people realized I had run for office the same way that they had. You need to be politically. The president and the people around him get a lot of their policy from watching cable news networks. And quite frankly, you need to have people who are capable of going on Fox News, mixing it up with the host at Newsmax, CNN, etc., and getting the Canadian message out. You need to be wired into the business community in Canada and the United States. It really helps to have a network on both sides of the border because it's $1 trillion trade relationship that has to be managed, and there are a lot of details. And maybe most important of all, you've got to be wired to the Prime Minister. Americans, when they talk to our ambassador, need to know they are talking directly almost to our Prime Minister. So he needs to be close to the Prime Minister and have the total confidence of the Prime Minister. And more importantly, people on the other side of the border need to believe that he has the confidence of the Prime Minister.
No, it's a key point. And Ambassador Hillman, I think about 6 years she's been in that job. And with this looking like it's going to turn into the full CUSMA review, she'd kind of need to sign up for multiple years if she was going to stay. So now the change. And I wonder just what you think the replacement's walking into. Like Washington, the most political city on earth, arguably the most unpredictable administration in the history of the United States, and the trade deal front and center, and with people like Trade Representative Jameson Greer, as we heard earlier in the show, talking about maybe we split this into multiple deals. I mean, what do you make of the dynamic the next ambassador is going to be inheriting?
Well, the ambassador has to do all that and manage the day job as well. I was working there, and there are a myriad of trade issues. It's the biggest embassy in Washington, as befits the biggest relationship in Washington. So I think the situation is complex, and it's made more complex by the unpredictability of this government. By the way, I should tell you, this idea that Ambassador Greer has proposed about splitting the negotiations with Mexico and Canada, doing them differently, that's not new. In fact, we encountered that back in 1993 when President Bush was in office, and a negotiation took place bilaterally with Mexico. And it was only as a result of the good relationship between President Bush that he was able to turn that into a three-way a bilateral deal, which is, of course, became known as NAFTA. So we should, I think we're better off as a tripartite agreement. Fortress North America works well, and our relationship with Mexico is very respectful. In fact, you should know that as a result of the trade wars, which the president has unfortunately triggered, Canada bought more cars from Mexico than the United States for the first time in 3 decades. And so that's quite something. And so I think we should nurture that relationship. We've got a rail line now going directly to Mexico. We've got wheat going to Mexico from Manitoba. Alberta's doubled their exports to Mexico just in the past year. So there are a lot of good things happening with Mexico as well.
But do you think Trade Representative Greer is talking about just splitting the negotiations or maybe splitting the deal? Because there's an appetite for bilateral deals as well with America, because they like to use the might of their economy as the main leverage point. And that creates a whole new dynamic potentially for Canada and Mexico if that's what happens.
Make no mistake, that's exactly what they want to do. They want to use, they want to be bullies. They want to be a bully with every trade partner on the planet, isolate them, and exert maximum pressure. But, when I listen to the attributes he describes are actually in favor of Canada. When you think about it, and we've talked about this before, Mexico has different environmental standards. They have different labor standards. They don't have a security relationship with the United States. They don't have an energy relationship. They don't have critical minerals, which the United States needs. They are the source of drugs to the United States, which we're not. They've got a migration problem with the United States, which we don't. For Chinese manufacturing, which we haven't. So in some ways, our attributes are substantially different and in our favor. But having said all of that, I still think that we're better off having a Fortress North America approach to some of the very challenging situations from around the world.
So just as a final point, the attributes of the economic partnership and the deal, the attributes, though, of the next ambassador. I know you talked about the need to have some political skills, the need for it to have a close alignment with the Prime Minister so that the people in that town know that you are speaking with Mark Carney's voice and Mark Carney's approval. So just back to the name of Mark Wiseman, and I don't know Mr. Wiseman, I don't know if you know him, but he comes from sort of the corporate background. Is that the sort of fit that you would look for with something like that, or do you think some sort of retail elected political skills is sort of where the lean should be? How do you view it, sir?
Look, I know Mark Wiseman, and he has substantial capabilities. So I'm not going to opine on his name versus other names because I have no idea where the Prime Minister's coming down. I will tell you the election when I was ambassador, and he was good enough to ask me to stay on as ambassador. And I said, I'm not going to do that. And he said, why? I could work with you. And I said, yes, and I could work with you. But the Americans need to know that you've got your guy in Washington, and they'll never believe that if I'm the guy in Washington. So I believe that to be the case today. It's really important for the Prime Minister to have his person in Washington during these critical times.
Sorry, Mr. McKenna, you just broke up there for a little second. You say this was a conversation with Stephen Harper. Am I understanding that right? That he asked you to stay on, and you said, yes, we can work together, but the world needs to know this is truly your pick. Did I hear you right there?
That's exactly right.
Okay. All right. Well, I appreciate that insight. Look, thanks for joining us, sir. That's former Canadian ambassador to the United States, Frank McKenna, and of course, former Premier of New Brunswick. Can't leave out your home province. Thank you, sir. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
We're going to chat about that with the Power Panel. We've got Amanda Alvaro here. She is a former Liberal Party communication strategist. And here in the studio, Tim Powers is a former strategist for Conservative parties. Jordan Leiknitz is a former NDP strategist. And Sherelle Evelyn is the managing editor of the Hill Times. It is good to see you all. Amanda, this is, boy, this is a tough job to have to try to fill right now. I mean, Ambassador Hillman leaving after 6 years, because it sounds like this is going to be a big slog ahead. What do you make of the timing and where it leaves that particular role?
So we heard in reports today, and I was trying to think, did we know this before? I don't think so, that she had signaled that she would be leaving in 2026. I think this was privately. She had told Prime Minister Carney that she, in the spring at some point, that she would be leaving in 2026. And kind of the way that the reports were framed today, it was like, listen, if you're not going to be there through all of the CUSMA negotiations, and God only knows how long those are going to take, that you're better to exit prior to those negotiations getting started, as opposed to exiting midway through. You can imagine how problematic that could be. So timing to me sounded more like something that she had decided was more of a life choice that had already been decided versus having some signal or was symbolic of something that was happening at the negotiating table right now.
Yeah, and Tim, I think we all kind of knew, I think that maybe that was the timeline for Ambassador Hillman to leave. But I think the acceleration comes from the fact that this looks like it's all going to drag right up to that July 1 CUSMA cutoff to start whatever happens next in the process, and that if you're not going to see that through, your replacement needs the runway.
Yeah, and look, I don't think there is anything more to this than Amanda said, that the ambassador, she's earned the right to make a choice, and she's made a choice. But I do think the Prime Minister, like other Prime Ministers before him, wants to put somebody in there who he's comfortable with, who he knows well. I mean, it sounds like whether it's Mark Wiseman or somebody else, we're going to go back to the model of somebody very close to the Prime Minister takes that job. With Jean Chrétien, it was Ray Chrétien. With Brian Mulroney, it started off with Derek Burney. With Stephen Harper, it was Michael Wilson. So Justin Trudeau kind of went away from that and went to Kristen Hillman, an accomplished diplomat. So I suspect it will be someone close to the Prime Minister because the Prime Minister is so hands-on on this. He wants somebody who knows the files, he can trust, and probably, this is why Wiseman's name makes sense, somebody who knows that New York world. Wiseman was in New York. He's done global business there. He worked out of there and the like. So hardly surprising that his name is being floated, as is Jean Charest, who is also extremely accomplished but has more political chops.
Yes, and David McNaughton was there first.
Yes, sorry,
Trudeau,
David McNaughton.
Before Kirsten Hillman,
also
right?
Close to the Prime
close
Minister,
to the Prime
fitting
Minister.
your theory, yeah.
Well, look, Jordan, just before we get to you, because Tim mentioned Mark Wiseman, Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre was focused on that today. He moved on from the pipeline motion, switching his focus in question period to that possible new Canadian ambassador to the United States. Have a listen to this.
Canadians have wanted to know who came up with the idea of radical open doors, liberal immigration that overwhelmed our healthcare, housing, and job market. Well, it turns out it was Mark Wiseman, the Prime Minister's corporate crony, longtime Liberal elite, and head of the Century Initiative, whose stated mission is to triple the population of Canada to 100 million people, a policy that is designed to profit multinational corporations by driving wages down and housing costs up.
Okay, so Jordan, fully on board, obviously, with maybe the front runner for this. But it's interesting, this has already become a flashpoint here, even before it's announced, assuming this is where it goes. What do you make of what the Prime Minister might do here and how it might be perceived?
Well, I mean, I agree with Tim. I think it would be very fitting in terms of the pattern the Prime Minister has set for him to choose somebody that he's very comfortable with, somebody who's from his world, and certainly Wiseman would fit the criteria for that. I think in terms of this line of attack from the Conservatives, they have to be a bit careful here because ultimately, if he is going to be the choice of the Prime Minister to be the new ambassador in the United States, you got to be careful not to be talking down that role in the midst of trade negotiations. It's significant. That person will be carrying the standard for Canada, not for any one party. And this kind of, frankly, nonsense, I think is really unhelpful overall to our position in the U.S. So I'm not sure that that's a path we'll see them going down over the long run, and probably not really a great one even today.
Yeah, I mean, Cheryl, and just for the audience at home, the Century Initiative that Mr. Poilievre was talking about there was this push. Dominic Barton, I think, might have been involved with it at one point, but Mark Wiseman certainly was, that Canada needs to grow to 100 million people by 2100, which is about 1.1, 1.2% population growth from where we are now, so not outrageous, but, organically we could get there. But anyway, that's what they're talking about there. What do you make of where this could potentially go?
Yeah, I agree with Jordan that, there is that element of risk for the opposition parties to potentially undercut somebody who is supposed to be seen as carrying the standard for Canada, especially as we go into such contentious discussions. but also at the same time, I do think that those are the types of questions that will need to be answered. I mean, it doesn't go unnoticed that, for example, on Mark Wiseman's social media accounts, he deleted today a tweet that that had that quote in there about specifically about Quebec howling.
Okay, so I got this, and I got to add a bit of context here. This is the tweet that was deleted, and we have a screen grab of it. 100 million Canadians by 2100 may not be federal policy, but it should be, even if it makes Quebec howl. Now, that's a provocative sentence, and if Mark Wiseman had said that, it would be a problem. That's the headline of an Andrew Coyne column that he tweeted out. So if Andrew Coyne is the pick to be ambassador to the U.S.,
sure.
this is going to be a problem. But
the fact that
he had to do it.
He had to do it. And so, the fact that it was creating enough of a conversation to the point that he is now, his name is out there, he's cleaning up social media, all of these things, these are things that are going to have to be answered because everybody is making very clear what the attack lines are going to be. So if they can kind of, at this point, firm up, figure out what the, essentially what the offer research is and how to counteract it at a time when, people are going to be looking very closely, that is something that is going to need to happen.
Right. So Amanda, on this point, this is the way Twitter worked back in the day. If you retweeted an article, it created the text of the tweet for you, and that's provocative. But it's a bad faith attack against Mark Wiseman. Yes, he supports 100 million. I don't know if he supports Quebec howling. He did write an op-ed in the Globe and Mail where he criticized supply management. This was his words, and that he said it should be gotten rid of. Unpopular in Quebec, especially if you go in to be the U.S. ambassador, though presumably you do what Mark Carney tells you in that job, and he has said supply management is to be protected. But you can see a fraught path here if they go this choice, at least on the domestic political consequence front.
Yes, because his name is just out there right now, and already there's mass scrutiny around things that he's tweeted at various points around the op-ed that you mentioned, where he talks about large-scale reforms in areas like legacy, supply management. All of these become really problematic because that's the kind of thing that dogs you, right? And this is true of any candidate for any major position. Things that you once tweeted about, something that you once posted about, an article that you were once referenced in. But I think the most problematic is actually deleting it. Trying to scrub things as your name gets out there is almost an admission that what you had said was wrong, or there was error to it, or that we should be critical of it. I think the way that we are operating now is that if it's out there, you leave it alone. If you have to explain it or talk about it, you do. But scrubbing it, I would say, was the wrong call for him today.
Right, but again, it's not something he said. It's something Andrew Coyne wrote and the Globe put as a headline. But they had to get rid of it, right?
If I'm the Conservatives, be careful of the glass houses thing. There was this guy called Harper.
Totally.
He wrote this op-ed once about in a paper called the Washington Journal about how he supposedly supported the Iraq War, and he also said apparently he was going to build a firewall around Alberta. Guess what? He became Prime Minister for 10 years. So, you should be careful, but you're not going to get away from that. I think the other interesting thing for the Conservatives is suggestions were if Pierre Poilievre had have won, he was going to appoint somebody fairly prominent from Toronto who comes from a world like Mark Wiseman's.
Mark Mulroney is the name that was associated with the
I won't. And,
well,
and Mark, if Mark Mulroney were ever in that job, he'd be fantastic at it. But it's just the running down of the people. I get you got to do the politics, but at this time, I take us all back to April when we're all going to work together on this. If it is Mark Wiseman, if it is Jean Charest, if it is Mark Mulroney, the opposition, offer a tepid critique, but ultimately you want that person to succeed.
That's right.
Yeah.
Again, we got to get back on the same page for the Team Canada stuff. We can fight the domestic stuff. We can fight the Alberta MOU all you want. But I think we want a really skilled person in Washington who's there for Canada, not for the Liberals, not for the Conservatives, not for the Democrats, but there for us.
Yeah, it always was, because I'm old like Tim, growing up, Jordan, is that politics ended at the border, right? And I know this would be a domestic appointment for a foreign job, but I don't know of a new U.S. ambassador walking into a more pressure cooker environment than whoever takes the baton from Kirsten Hillman.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's probably one of the worst jobs on the continent right now. But look, and this is why sometimes politically, even though you can do something, it doesn't mean that you should. And I think that there is a challenge here for the Conservatives because there's a clear attack dog temptation, and they're wanting to chase every car. But the problem is that, if he is the one who's going to be appointed, there's nothing that they're going to do that's going to prevent that, right? So then you are wounding the person who is going to be appointed in that role. So you have to really reflect, is getting that headline, that hit for the day, worth it? Is it worth that risk in the long run for that person? Now, I would say, look, Mark Wiseman is not going to be deciding Canada's immigration policy, so I think his views on the Century Initiative are actually pretty beside the point. His views on supply management, on the other hand, far more material. You could pursue a line of questioning around that would be fair and material, but that's not what they're doing. They're doing something different.
Well, and if anything, on the immigration policy, they've gone in the opposite direction of the last while because they went way too hard at it, and now they're going in the other direction. And Sherelle, like supply management, I don't know if whoever is a new ambassador, whether they would also be the lead negotiator, because Kirsten Hillman had both of those roles. Do they split that? Do they do it in different ways? I don't know how that could play out, but it's going to be Mark Carney calling the shots, I think. It's pretty clear.
Yeah, it's going to be Mark Carney calling the shots, and more importantly, it's going to be Donald Trump. And whoever is in that chair has to develop that relationship. As politicians come and go, political appointments come and go. As far as we know, Donald Trump and potentially somebody, of his ilk, it could be coming in after him. And so, Ambassador Hillman had a pretty good relationship with the president, and whoever is going to be filling that seat, filling that chair, needs to be able to move through Washington, talk to the president how they want to be spoken to, while advancing Canada's interests. And that's going to be a really, really tricky thing to do, because this is not somebody who, cares if somebody has a political or diplomatic background, because he certainly doesn't.
Yeah, and she's an interesting figure in that role, in that she came from the diplomatic corps, first woman ever to hold the job, and typically it's been political people put in that job, and she was definitely not that.